I thought I was about to become a father. Now, I don't even know who I am anymore. I never thought I'd be the guy posting on Reddit about his marriage. For most of my life, I was the person who believed that if you loved someone enough, trusted them enough, and showed up every day, things would work out. Not perfectly, not like some movie, but well enough. Until 6 months ago, I would have described my marriage as solid. My wife and I had been together for 8 years, married for 5. We weren't one of those couples constantly posting romantic photos online, but we were happy. Or at least I genuinely believed we were. We had routines. Saturday morning coffee together. Netflix shows we'd argue about and then secretly continue watching without each other. Late night grocery runs because we'd forgotten something for dinner. Small things. Ordinary things. The kind of life that feels boring when you're in it, but priceless once it's gone. For the past year, we'd been talking seriously about having a child. Not obsessively, just gradually. We'd stop when we saw kids playing at a park, discuss names during long drives, wonder whether our future son would inherit my stubbornness or her sense of humor. For the first time in my life, fatherhood didn't feel scary. It felt right. I wanted it. God, I wanted it. Then came the day that changed everything. I got home from work exhausted. It had been one of those miserable days where nothing goes right. Dread, meetings, deadlines. I remember opening the front door and immediately noticing something strange. The house was spotless. Candles were lit. Music was playing softly from the kitchen. My wife looked nervous. Not bad nervous. Excited nervous. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. I laughed and asked if I forgot an anniversary. She just stared at me. Then she handed me a small gift box. I honestly thought it was some joke. Inside was a positive pregnancy test. For a second, my brain stopped working. I looked at the test, then at her, then back at the test, again and again. I couldn't process it. What is this? I asked. My voice cracked. She started crying immediately, the kind of crying that comes from overwhelming happiness. And then she said the words I dreamed about hearing for years. I'm pregnant. I don't remember crossing the room. 1 second I was standing there. The next I was holding her. Both of us crying, laughing, trying to talk over each other. I must have asked her if she was serious 20 times. She kept nodding. I remember putting my hand against her stomach even though I knew it was way too early. We sat on the kitchen floor for almost an hour, just talking, dreaming, planning. Everything changed in those 60 minutes. Suddenly we weren't discussing hypothetical children anymore. There was a baby. Our baby. I started calculating due dates, thinking about cribs, tours, first birthdays. I even downloaded one of those pregnancy apps that same night. The next few weeks felt unreal. I called my brother. She told her parents. We debated whether to reveal the news publicly yet. At night I'd lie awake imagining what kind of father I'd be. For the first time in years, the future felt bright. So, like life was finally moving towards something bigger than ourselves. But looking back now, there was one detail from that night that keeps replaying in my head. A moment so small I ignored it completely. After we'd spent hours celebrating, after she'd fallen asleep beside me, I got up to get a glass of water. When I came back into the bedroom, she wasn't asleep anymore. She was sitting upright in bed, staring at her phone, frozen, almost frightened. The second she noticed me, she locked the screen. Too quickly. Way too quickly. I remember asking if everything was okay. She smiled, said she was just tired, and I believed her. Because why wouldn't I? I was about to become a father. At least, that's what I thought. And at the time, I had absolutely no idea that a single message on that phone was about to destroy everything. For the next month, I lived inside what felt like the happiest period of my life. Every morning started with a new ritual. Before work, I'd kiss my wife goodbye and ask how she was feeling. Every evening, I'd come home and read whatever update the pregnancy app gave us that day. The baby was the size of a seed, then a blueberry, then a grape. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I became obsessed. I started watching parenting videos during lunch breaks. I researched strollers I couldn't afford. I found myself slowing down whenever I drove past playgrounds. The idea of becoming a father had somehow rewired my brain. My wife seemed happy too, at least at first. She laughed when I talked to her stomach. She rolled her eyes when I spent 30 minutes comparing baby monitors. She teased me for already acting like an overprotective dad. Everything felt normal. Then little things started happening. Not major things. Nothing that would make a reasonable person suspect anything. Just tiny moments that felt off. The first one happened when I asked about her first doctor's appointment. I wasn't even demanding to go. I simply asked when it was scheduled. For some reason, she hesitated. Only for a second, but long enough for me to notice. Then she quickly said she'd handle it herself because it was just routine paperwork. I remember feeling slightly disappointed. I wanted to be involved. Still, I told myself she probably wanted some independence. Pregnancy was happening to her body, after all, not mine. A week later, I asked again. Same reaction, same hesitation, same quick change of subject. There's nothing exciting to report, she said. You're worrying too much. Maybe I was. So I dropped it, at least temporarily. Then there was the phone. The phone became a strange source of tension. Not obvious tension, subtle tension. Before the pregnancy, neither of us cared much about privacy. We knew each other's passcodes. Our phones sat around the house unattended all the time. Neither of us had ever given the other a reason to worry. But sometime after the pregnancy announcement, that changed. She started keeping her phone face down, taking it with her everywhere, even short trips to the bathroom. Again, none of this automatically meant anything. People deserve privacy. I understood that, but the change itself bothered me, because it wasn't normal for her. One night we were watching television together when her phone lit up. I wasn't trying to snoop. I genuinely wasn't. The screen was facing me. I couldn't help seeing it. The notification disappeared before I could read much, but I caught a name. Just a first name. Ryan. The message vanished instantly. My wife grabbed the phone almost before it finished lighting up. I casually asked who Ryan was. Her response came so fast it felt rehearsed. A coworker. Then she immediately started talking about something else. The weather. A TV show. Dinner. Anything except Ryan. That should have been the end of it. Except I couldn't stop thinking about how quickly she'd answered. Not because of what she said, because of how she said it. Like she'd already anticipated the question. Like she'd already prepared the response. The thought made me uncomfortable. So I buried it. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I was looking for problems that didn't exist. People get weird during pregnancy. Stress changes behavior. Hormones affect emotions. There were dozens of innocent explanations. And honestly, I wanted innocent explanations. More than anything. Because every future plan I had now revolved around this child. Our child. The nursery we'd already started discussing. The names we'd written down. The life we'd begun building. Questioning any part of that felt unthinkable. Then something happened that should have been insignificant. A conversation with my brother. One sentence. One harmless observation. And for the first time, a small crack appeared in the reality I'd been desperately protecting. A crack I wouldn't be able to ignore much longer. The conversation with my brother lasted less than 5 minutes. At the time, it seemed completely harmless. He called to check on me after work, and naturally the pregnancy came up. It was all I talked about anymore. I told him about baby names, the nursery ideas, how excited I was, how terrified I was, the usual first-time father stuff. Then he asked a simple question. So how far along is she now? I told him. There was a brief pause. Nothing dramatic, just silence. Then he said, huh. I laughed. What? Not there? No. Seriously. What? Another pause. Then he shrugged it off. Probably nothing. I just thought the timeline sounded a little weird. My stomach tightened. What timeline? Forget it. No? What timeline? He hesitated. I thought you told me you guys took that trip to Denver around the time she got pregnant. With it? And wasn't that later? I immediately felt defensive. Not toward my wife. Toward him. Like he'd accidentally insulted something sacred. You're mixing up dates. Maybe. He sounded unconvinced. Then he changed the subject. The call ended a few minutes later, but his comment stayed with me. Not because it proved anything. It didn't. Not even close. But once a thought enters your head, sometimes it refuses to leave. That night, while my wife slept beside me, I found myself opening my calendar, just to double check. Nothing more. I reviewed work schedules, travel dates, family events, the weekend trip my brother mentioned. I wasn't investigating. At least that's what I told myself. I was simply organizing memories, verifying details, normal things. Still, I spent nearly an hour staring at dates. Eventually, I convinced myself everything looked fine. Close enough, anyway. Pregnancy estimates weren't exact. Conception dates weren't exact. Bodies didn't operate on perfect schedules. I knew that. So I closed the calendar and went to bed. Problem solved. Except it wasn't. Because over the next few weeks, more little moments kept piling up, each one harmless by itself. Together, they started forming a pattern. The doctor's appointments became strangely difficult to discuss. Every time I asked about them, my wife gave vague answers. Everything's normal. The baby looks healthy. The doctor isn't concerned. That was usually the entire conversation. Meanwhile, every other pregnant woman I knew seemed eager to share details. Ultrasound photos, measurements, heartbeats, updates. My wife avoided specifics. Not aggressively, just enough to make me notice. Then there was her mood. Pregnancy explained some of it. Of course it did. but there was something else underneath, something I couldn't identify. She seemed anxious all the time, not nervous about becoming a mother, nervous about something else. I'd catch her staring into space, chewing her lip, looking distracted. Sometimes I'd ask what was wrong. She'd smile immediately, too quickly. I'm fine. Always the same answer. I'm fine. Nothing's wrong. Just tired. I started hearing those words so often they stopped sounding real. Then Ryan appeared again, not directly, just indirectly. One evening we were having dinner when she mentioned work, a project, deadline, office drama, normal conversation. Then she casually dropped his name. Ryan said this. Ryan suggested that. Ryan thinks management is making a mistake. I listened carefully, trying not to seem interested. The weird thing wasn't that she mentioned him. The weird thing was how often she mentioned him. Once I noticed it, I couldn't stop noticing it. Ryan seemed to exist in every work story, every office anecdote, every complaint, every joke. It wasn't proof of anything. People talk about coworkers. That's normal. Still, I found myself wondering why I'd never heard of him before. 8 years together, 5 years married, and suddenly one particular coworker was everywhere. I hated myself for noticing. I hated myself for caring. More than once, I sat alone and asked myself what was wrong with me. My wife was pregnant. She needed support. She needed stability. Instead, I was mentally cataloging conversations like some paranoid detective. The guilt was overwhelming. So I doubled down on being supportive, bought flowers, cooked dinner, went shopping for baby furniture, acted exactly like the excited future father I wanted to be. But inside, something had started changing. A small voice had appeared, a voice that asked questions I didn't want to hear, questions I immediately pushed away every time they surfaced. Until one night, while organizing paperwork for our insurance provider, I found a document that made those questions impossible to ignore. And for the first time, I felt genuine fear. The document wasn't hidden. That's what bothered me most. It was sitting in a folder on our kitchen counter with several other medical papers, insurance forms, appointment reminders, routine pregnancy information. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for a completely different document when I found it. At first, I barely glanced at it. Then I noticed a date, a very specific date, and suddenly, I couldn't look away. It was an appointment summary from one of her prenatal visits. Most of the medical terminology meant nothing to me, but one line stood out. Estimated gestational age. I stared at it, read it twice, then 3 times. My heart started beating faster, not because I understood exactly what it meant, because I understood enough. The timeline didn't match the one my wife had been telling me. Not perfectly, not even close. I immediately looked for explanations. Maybe I was reading it wrong. Maybe gestational age wasn't the same thing as conception. Maybe doctors calculated things differently. Maybe there were factors I didn't understand. I wanted there to be factors I didn't understand. I practically begged the universe for them. Instead of confronting her, I opened my laptop. A simple search. Just for clarity. Just for peace of mind. Nothing more. An hour later, I wished I'd never searched anything. The more I read, the worse I felt. Medical sites explained how pregnancy dating worked, how gestational age was typically calculated, how conception windows were estimated. None of it was exact, but none of it supported the timeline I'd been carrying in my head, not even remotely. I closed the browser, opened it again, read everything a second time, then a third. I became obsessed. Every article, every medical forum, every explanation. I kept searching for the answer I wanted, the answer that would make everything normal again. It never came. By midnight, my stomach felt sick. I remember sitting alone in the dark living room while my wife slept upstairs. The house was silent, and for the first time since the pregnancy announcement, I allowed myself to think something I had spent weeks avoiding. What if something is wrong? Not with the baby. Wes, the thought terrified me. So, I immediately fought it. Hud. People make mistakes with dates. Doctors revise estimates. Pregnancy timelines shift. There were dozens of innocent possibilities. I repeated them like prayers. By morning, I'd convinced myself again. Mostly, at least enough to function. The next few days were miserable. I couldn't stop noticing things. Not because new evidence appeared, because uncertainty changes how you see everything. Every conversation felt loaded. Every hesitation felt meaningful. Every unexplained moment felt suspicious. I hated it. I hated the version of myself I was becoming. Then my wife started avoiding one topic entirely. The due date. Whenever it came up, she'd redirect the conversation. If friends asked, she'd give vague answers. If family asked, she'd change subjects. If I asked, she'd become irritated. One evening I finally pressed a little harder, not aggressively, just enough to understand. Why do you seem uncomfortable talking about the timeline? The reaction was immediate and startling. Her entire expression changed. She looked angry, actually angry, for maybe 2 seconds. Then she forced a smile. Why are you obsessing over this? I froze. Obsessing? I'd asked one question. What? Yet somehow she sounded defensive, almost frightened. The conversation ended badly. Not a huge fight, just tension, silence, distance. For the first time in our marriage, I felt like we were standing on opposite sides of something invisible, neither of us willing to acknowledge it, neither of us able to move around it. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake replaying every conversation from the previous 2 months, every odd reaction, every unexplained moment, every mention of Ryan, every avoided appointment, every strange answer, and slowly, against my will, separate pieces started connecting. Not into certainty, not into proof, just into a possibility so painful that I physically flinched whenever my mind approached it. Around 3 in the morning, I got out of bed and walked downstairs. I needed water, anything. As I passed the kitchen table, I noticed my wife's phone charging beside her purse. The screen suddenly lit up. A message notification. Just a few words. Not enough to explain anything. Not enough to prove anything. But enough to make my blood run cold. The sender's name was Ryan, and the message began with 4 words I will never forget. Have you told him? I stood there staring at the glowing screen. For a second, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The notification remained visible for only a moment before fading away. Then the phone went dark. The kitchen became silent again, but something inside me had changed. Up until that point, every concern I'd had could still be explained away. Every inconsistency, every strange reaction, every uncomfortable feeling. There had always been another possibility, another interpretation, another reason, but those 4 words hit differently. Have you told him? Told me what? My brain immediately started generating answers. None of them good. I hated every one of them. I hated myself for even considering them. For several minutes, I just stood there. The phone was right in front of me. One swipe, one glance. I could probably see the entire conversation. The temptation was overwhelming, but I couldn't do it. Maybe that makes me stupid. Maybe it makes me weak. I don't know. At the time, it felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. If I looked, I was admitting something. Admitting I no longer trusted my wife. Admitting I believed she might be capable of something devastating. I wasn't ready for that. So, I walked away. I went back upstairs, lay beside her, stared at the ceiling until sunrise, and slept maybe 20 minutes. The next day was torture. I couldn't focus at work. Emails blurred together. Meetings passed without me hearing half of what people said. Every spare second, my mind returned to that message. Have you told him? Have you told him? Have you told him? Over and over. By lunchtime, I'd convinced myself it was work-related, a project, a promotion, office gossip, anything. By dinner, I was convinced it wasn't. The uncertainty was eating me alive. Meanwhile, my wife acted completely normal, or at least she tried to. But now that I was paying attention, I noticed things I hadn't before. Tiny signs, micro-expressions, moments of tension. She checked her phone constantly, more than ever. Sometimes she'd smile at messages. Sometimes she'd look anxious. Sometimes she'd immediately lock the screen. Every time it happened, my stomach twisted. The worst part wasn't the suspicion. It was the guilt, because I still loved her, completely, even while questioning everything. I would look at her across the dinner table and remember the woman I'd spent 8 years with, the woman I'd trusted more than anyone, the woman carrying the child I believed was mine. Then I'd remember the message, and the doubt would return. One evening, I finally confided in someone, my friend Marcus. We've known each other since college. He's the kind of person who doesn't panic, doesn't exaggerate, doesn't jump to conclusions. I deliberately left out some details, just enough to test my own thinking. I described the timeline confusion, the appointments, the defensiveness, the message. When I finished, Marcus was quiet, far too quiet. Say something. He looked uncomfortable. I don't know, man. What? I think you're asking me to tell you something you already suspect. His answer made me angry immediately, because it wasn't what I wanted to hear. I don't suspect anything. Marcus gave me a look, the kind friends give when they know you're lying to yourself. Then why are you keeping track of all this? I didn't have an answer, because he was right. At some point, I had stopped noticing inconsistencies accidentally. I was actively looking for them now, searching for them, collecting them, trying to solve a puzzle I desperately wanted to be wrong about. That realization scared me, more than any message, more than any timeline issue, because it meant a part of me already believed there was something to find. A few days later, another appointment came and went. Again, I wasn't invited. Again, details were vague. Again, questions led nowhere. By then, the emotional distance between us had become impossible to ignore. We weren't fighting. That almost would have been easier. Instead, we were drifting, quietly, painfully, like two people pretending everything was fine while standing on opposite sides of a widening crack. Then, late one Friday night, an accidental discovery gave me the first piece of information that wasn't based on feelings, assumptions, or guesses. For the first time, I found something concrete, and the moment I saw it, I knew my life was about to split into two parts: the person I had been before that discovery, and the person I would become after it. The discovery happened because of a printer, not because I was investigating, not because I was spying. A stupid printer. That's all it was. My wife had been working from home more often recently. On Friday night, she asked me to print a document she needed for the following week. She was upstairs taking a shower. I was downstairs in the office. Simple, normal. The printer connected to both of our laptops through the home network, and sometimes files remained in the print queue history. I opened the wrong folder by mistake. One click. That was it. One click changed everything. At first, I didn't even understand what I was looking at. It appeared to be a medical document, an ultrasound report. I almost closed it immediately. Then I noticed the date. The report was from an appointment I'd never heard about. Not one she'd mentioned, not one she'd discussed, not one that appeared anywhere on the calendar we'd shared for years. I felt a small knot form in my stomach. Nothing more, just unease. I began reading. The report contained measurements, medical abbreviations, numbers I didn't understand. Then I found the estimated gestational age of them, and this time there was no ambiguity, no confusion, no misunderstanding. The estimate placed the pregnancy significantly further along than the timeline my wife had repeatedly described. I stared at the screen. Read it again, then again. My hands started shaking, because suddenly all the dates I'd been obsessing over aligned in a way I couldn't ignore. I opened the calendar, compared everything: trip dates, work schedules, family gatherings, the night we'd celebrated the pregnancy announcement, the weeks before it, the weeks before that. I kept hoping I'd find an error, a miscalculation, something, anything. Instead, the numbers kept leading me to the same place. The likely conception window appeared to overlap with a period when my wife and I had barely seen each other. A period I remembered clearly. I had spent nearly 2 weeks traveling for work, not completely absent, but absent enough that the timeline made less and less sense. My chest felt tight. I couldn't breathe properly. The room seemed smaller somehow. I remember physically standing up from the chair because sitting suddenly felt impossible. Then I started arguing with myself, mildly, internally. You're overreacting. Doctors revise dates all the time. You don't understand medical terminology. Stop doing this. Stop, stop, stop. But another voice had started speaking now. A quieter voice, a colder one. The voice asked a question I could no longer avoid. Why would she hide this appointment? Not the pregnancy. The appointment. Why keep it secret? Why avoid discussing timelines? Why become defensive? Why lock her phone? Why hide details? The questions piled up faster than answers, and for the first time, I genuinely felt afraid of what the answers might be. When my wife came downstairs 20 minutes later, I almost confronted her immediately. Almost. Instead, I said nothing. I watched her, listened to her, studied every expression, every movement, every word. The experience was surreal, like speaking to someone I knew intimately and didn't know at all. The woman standing in front of me looked exactly like my wife, but suddenly I wasn't sure who she was anymore. That weekend became unbearable. I barely slept. I reviewed timelines repeatedly, hours of it, the same dates, the same calculations, the same impossible conclusions. By Sunday night, I wasn't looking for truth anymore. I was looking for a reason to stop, a reason to believe I was wrong. Then fate handed me something even worse. An answer, not a complete answer. Not yet, just a piece, a small piece, enough to transform suspicion into something far more dangerous. While scrolling through old social media photos, trying to reconstruct timelines, I found a picture from months earlier. A work event my wife had attended. Dozens of employees were in the photo. Most meant nothing to me, but one face stood out immediately. Ryan. And the moment I saw him, I realized something that made my blood run cold. This wasn't just some random coworker she'd recently mentioned. I had met him before, twice, and both times, something about the way he looked at my wife had bothered me. At the time, I dismissed it. Now, I couldn't, because suddenly another terrifying possibility entered my mind. What if Ryan wasn't just a coworker? What if Ryan was the reason none of the dates made sense? Once Ryan became a real possibility, I couldn't unsee him. It's strange how memory works. For months, maybe years, your brain ignores details it considers unimportant. Then suddenly one piece of information changes, and those same memories come rushing back with horrifying clarity. I remembered the first time I met him. It was at a company holiday party about a year earlier. Nothing dramatic happened. No obvious flirting. No inappropriate behavior. Just introductions. Handshakes. Small talk. Normal adult interaction. At least that's what I'd thought. Now, replaying the scene in my head, I remembered something else. The way he already seemed familiar with her. Not professionally familiar. Comfortably familiar. The kind of ease people develop after spending significant time together. Back then, I'd barely noticed. Now it haunted me. The second time I met him had been even more forgettable. A charity event organized through her company. We spoke for maybe 5 minutes, but there was one detail I suddenly couldn't stop thinking about. When I mentioned my upcoming work trip, Ryan had looked at my wife. Not at me. At her. Only for a second. A quick glance. Meaningless on its own. Yet now, viewed through a different lens, it felt loaded. Dangerously loaded. I hated what my mind was doing. Every memory was becoming evidence. Every interaction was becoming suspicious. I knew that wasn't healthy. I knew confirmation bias existed. I knew people could convince themselves of almost anything if they looked hard enough. But the problem was that I wasn't working from a blank slate anymore. The timeline issues existed. The hidden appointments existed. The defensive reactions existed. The message existed. Ryan existed. And all of them seemed to point in the same direction. The following week was the worst week of my life. Worse than the confrontation. Worse than the aftermath. Because uncertainty is its own kind of torture. At least certainty gives you something to fight. Uncertainty just eats you alive. Every morning I woke up hoping something would happen to prove me wrong. A simple explanation. A misunderstanding. Anything. Instead, more questions appeared. One evening my wife fell asleep on the couch. Her phone rested beside her. For nearly 10 minutes, I stared at it. 10 full minutes. Arguing with myself. Open it. Don't open it. You deserve answers. No, you deserve trust. If she's innocent, you'll destroy your marriage. If she's guilty, your marriage is already destroyed. Back and forth. Back and forth. Eventually, I picked it up. My hands were trembling. I wish I could say I felt justified. I didn't. I felt sick. As if terrified. The phone unlocked. And suddenly I was standing on the edge of a cliff. There were messages. Not many. Far fewer than I expected. Almost disappointingly ordinary. Work discussions. Project updates. Scheduling conversations. Nothing definitive. For a moment, relief flooded through me. Maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe everything truly was in my head. Then I noticed something. Large gaps. Weeks-long gaps. Conversations that didn't make sense. References to messages that weren't there. Entire sections missing. Elated, my stomach dropped. Because people don't usually delete routine work conversations. Not selectively. Not repeatedly. I kept scrolling. Okay. Searching. Then I found the message. Not a confession. Not explicit proof. Just one sentence. One sentence buried deep in an older conversation. A sentence that changed everything. Ryan had written, "I can't keep pretending this doesn't scare me too." That was it. No context. No explanation. Nothing else. Yet I immediately knew. Or at least I thought I knew. Because suddenly every piece clicked together. Not perfectly, but enough. Enough to create a picture I couldn't escape. I put the phone down. Walked into the bathroom. Locked the door. And stared at myself in the mirror. For almost an hour. I looked exhausted. Older. Broken. The man staring back at me no longer looked like an excited future father. He looked like someone standing at the edge of a truth he desperately didn't want to confirm. And for the first time, I allowed myself to say the words out loud. Not confidently. Not with certainty. Just barely above a whisper. What if the baby isn't mine? The question shattered something inside me. Because the moment I said it, I realized I no longer feared the possibility. I believed it. Or at least part of me did. And once that belief existed, there was no going back. The next morning, I made a decision. I was done guessing. Done rationalizing. Done explaining away impossible things. One way or another, I needed the truth. Even if the truth destroyed me. What I didn't know was that within 48 hours, I would finally get it. And it would be worse than anything I had imagined. The 48 hours that followed felt like a countdown to an execution. Not hers, mine. Because deep down, I already knew that whatever truth was waiting for me would permanently divide my life into before and after. I just didn't know how much it would hurt. Monday morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't function anymore. I couldn't focus on spreadsheets, meetings, deadlines, or anything remotely normal while my entire reality was collapsing. My wife kissed me goodbye before leaving for work. The same way she'd kissed me thousands of times before. The same smile. the same casual love you, the same ordinary routine, and somehow that made it worse. Because I kept asking myself the same question, was any of it real? Had she been lying every day, every week, every month? Or had our marriage been real once and then become something else? I didn't know which possibility hurt more. The house felt empty after she left. I sat alone at the kitchen table for hours. The same kitchen where we'd celebrated the pregnancy. The same floor where we'd cried and laughed together. The same room where I'd imagined teaching my future child to ride a bike. Every memory felt poisoned now, like someone had gone back and rewritten the meaning of everything. Around noon, Marcus called. Apparently, I sounded terrible when we'd spoken the night before. He asked how I was holding up. I told him the truth. I wasn't. There was a long silence. Then he said something that stuck with me. You're trying to solve this emotionally. What does that mean? It means you're treating evidence like hope. I didn't answer, because he was right. Every inconsistency I found, I immediately searched for an innocent explanation. Every suspicious detail became a debate. Every red flag became something I desperately tried to reinterpret. Not because the explanations made sense, because I needed them to. Marcus sighed. If you think she's lying, stop asking whether she might be lying and start asking why. That question followed me for the rest of the day. Why? Why hide appointments? Why avoid timelines? Why delete messages? Why become defensive? Why keep secrets? The answers all led to the same terrifying place. By evening, I felt physically sick. I hadn't eaten properly in almost 2 days. My chest constantly hurt. My stomach felt twisted. Sleep had become impossible. The stress was turning into something physical, something consuming. That night my wife noticed. Finally, we were sitting on opposite ends of the couch when she looked at me carefully. You seem distant. The irony almost made me laugh. Distant. The word felt absurd, like describing a hurricane as a light breeze. I'm just tired, I said. The lie tasted bitter, because it was the exact lie she'd been feeding me for weeks. She studied me for a moment, longer than usual, almost like she knew something was coming. Then she nodded and looked away. That moment scared me, not because of what happened, because of what didn't happen. She didn't ask questions, didn't push, didn't try to reconnect. It felt like she'd already accepted the distance between us, like she expected it, like she'd been preparing for it. Later that night, after she fell asleep, I sat alone in the living room. I spread every piece of information across the coffee table. Dates, appointment records, notes, screenshots I'd taken of timelines. Everything. For hours, I reconstructed the sequence of events. And again, until eventually there was nowhere left to hide. No interpretation left that made sense. No explanation left that fit the facts. Around 4 in the morning, something inside me finally broke. Not dramatically. No screaming. No punching walls. Just quiet devastation. I sat there and cried. Alone. Completely alone. For the child I thought was mine. For the future I'd already built in my head. For the man I had been only a few months earlier. The man who believed his marriage was safe. The man who believed he was about to become a father. By sunrise, I had made my decision. No more waiting. No more assumptions. No more fear. That evening, when my wife came home from work, I was going to confront her. I was going to put every inconsistency on the table. Every date. Every message. Every lie. And force the truth into the open. What I didn't realize was that she had already sensed the walls closing in. Because when she walked through the front door that night and saw me sitting there waiting, the color drained from her face before I said a single word. And in that instant, I knew she already understood exactly why I was there. I knew before she spoke, not the details, not the whole story, but enough. The look on her face told me that whatever happened next wasn't going to be a misunderstanding. She stood frozen in the doorway, purse still hanging from her shoulder, keys still in her hand. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. The silence felt unbearable. Then she forced a smile. A weak one. What are you doing sitting in the dark? I looked at her, really looked at her, at the woman I'd spent 8 years loving, the woman I trusted with every vulnerable part of myself, the woman carrying the child I'd already started thinking of as my son or daughter. And suddenly I didn't recognize her anymore. We need to talk. Her face tightened immediately, a tiny reaction, but I saw it. She sat down slowly across from me. Neither of us touched the coffee table. Neither of us touched the stack of papers sitting between us. For several seconds, we simply stared at each other. Then I asked the question, when exactly did you find out you were pregnant? She blinked, clearly not expecting that. Oh, you hurt me. A pause. Then she answered. I already knew the date she gave me. It was the same date she'd been repeating for weeks. The same timeline. The same story. And it was the same story I knew didn't fit. I slid one of the appointment summaries across the table. Her eyes dropped to the page. The moment she saw it, everything changed. I watched it happen. The color left her face. Her breathing shifted. Her shoulders stiffened. Fear. Real fear. Not confusion. Not surprise. Fear. Where did you get this? She asked quietly. I ignored the question. The dates don't match. Silence. I can explain. My heart sank. Not because of what she said. Because she didn't say I was wrong. She didn't say there had been a mistake. She didn't deny anything. She said she could explain. And in that moment, some part of me already knew. Still, I kept going. The appointments, the timeline, the hidden records, the deleted messages, one by one, every piece, every inconsistency, every question. As I spoke, she cried, at first quietly, then harder, but she still didn't answer. Not really. Instead, she kept saying things that sounded like answers without actually being answers. It wasn't supposed to happen. I never wanted this. You don't understand. I was scared. Every sentence made me angrier, because none of them addressed the only thing that mattered. Finally, I asked it, directly, the question that had been destroying me for weeks. Is the baby mine? The room went completely silent. I'll remember that silence for the rest of my life, not because it lasted long, because of what lived inside it. The answer. She looked down, not at me, not at the papers, at the floor, and she didn't speak. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 50. My entire world collapsed before she ever opened her mouth, because innocent people answer that question immediately. Finally, she whispered, I don't know. I think that hurt more than a direct confession. I don't know. 3 words. 3 words that erased years of certainty. 3 words that destroyed every future plan I'd made. 3 words that transformed me from an expectant father into a possibility. And maybe a question mark. I felt physically numb, like my body had stopped processing reality. Then the truth started emerging, piece by piece, not all at once. Ryan wasn't just a coworker. The relationship had started months earlier. She claimed it was emotional at first, then physical, then only a few times. Every admission arrived with another excuse, another justification, another attempt to soften the impact. She said she was confused, lonely, lost. She said it never meant anything serious. She said she had ended it. She said she loved me. She said she never intended for any of this to happen. The words blurred together. None of them mattered, because there was only one thing I could hear. The child I had spent months loving wasn't necessarily mine. The child whose future I had imagined every single day. The child I'd already bonded with in my heart might belong to another man. I broke completely. Not anger at first. Grief. Fair grief. The kind that feels like suffocating. I cried harder than I ever have in my life. Harder than at funerals. Harder than when I lost family members. Because I wasn't just losing a marriage. I was losing an identity. The identity of a father. The future version of myself I'd already become. By the end of the night, there was nothing left to uncover. The affair was real. The lies were real. The possibility that the baby wasn't mine was real. And as I sat there staring at the ruins of my life, I realized the hardest part was still ahead of me. Because now I had to learn how to survive after the truth. The morning after the confrontation, I woke up on the living room couch. For a few seconds, I didn't remember anything. I saw the ceiling, the coffee table, the blanket draped over me, and there was a brief moment where life felt normal. Then it all came back. The affair, Ryan, the pregnancy, the confession, the possibility that the child wasn't mine. It hit me like a truck. All over again. I couldn't breathe. I sat there staring at the floor for nearly an hour, unable to move, unable to think, unable to understand how my life had changed so completely in a single night. Upstairs, I could hear my wife moving around. Every sound felt foreign, like a stranger was walking through my house. Eventually, I grabbed my keys and left. No destination, no plan. I just drove for hours. The truth was that I didn't know where else to go. Every place reminded me of something. The restaurant where we'd celebrated our anniversary. The park where we'd talked about children. The coffee shop where she'd once told me I was her best friend. Memories were everywhere, and every memory hurt. People talk about heartbreak like it's emotional pain. For me, it became physical. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate. I lost nearly 15 pounds in a month. Some nights I'd wake up convinced the entire thing had been a nightmare. Then reality would return. And again, and again. A week after the confrontation, I moved into my brother's guest room. My wife begged me not to leave. She cried, apologized, promised transparency, promised therapy, promised anything she thought might stop me. But by then, trust wasn't damaged. It was gone, completely gone. And without trust, every promise sounded empty. The paternity test came later. Those weeks waiting for the results were some of the longest of my life. Part of me hoped, even after everything, even after the lies, even after the affair, part of me still hoped the child was mine. Not because I wanted the marriage anymore, because I couldn't bear losing both at the same time. When the results arrived, I opened them alone. I already knew. Somewhere deep down, I knew. But seeing it in writing was different. Cold, clinical, final. I was not the biological father. I stared at the paper until the words stopped looking like words. Then I cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like someone mourning a person who never got the chance to exist. The strangest part was explaining the grief to other people. Some didn't understand. After all, the baby had never really been mine, at least biologically. But that's not how I felt. For months, I had loved that child. For months, I had imagined birthdays, school events, bedtime stories, family vacations. I had already built an entire future around someone who vanished overnight. You don't lose those dreams without consequences. The divorce process started shortly afterward. It wasn't dramatic. No screaming matches, no revenge, no cinematic ending, just paperwork, lawyers, signatures, the slow dismantling of a life we built together. A year has passed since then. People always ask whether it gets easier. The answer is complicated. The pain changes shape. It stops dominating every thought, stops controlling every day, but it never disappears entirely. Certain songs still trigger memories. Certain dates still hurt. Sometimes I still catch myself wondering what that child looks like now. Then I remember that's no longer my story. I've spent the last year rebuilding. Therapy helped. My family helped. Friends helped. Time helped. Most importantly, I stopped defining myself by what happened to me. For a long time, I was the husband who got cheated on, the man whose wife got pregnant by someone else, the almost father. Eventually, I realized I couldn't stay there forever. What happened will always be part of my life, but it doesn't get to be my entire identity. I still don't have perfect closure. I don't think real life works that way. Some questions remain unanswered. Some scars remain visible. Some losses remain losses. But I've accepted something I couldn't accept a year ago. The future I lost wasn't the only future available to me. And while I never became the father I thought I was going to be, I'm finally becoming someone else. Someone stronger. Someone wiser. Someone capable of moving forward, one day at a time. And for now, that's enough. This is the end of the story. Don't forget to share with your friends, comment, like, and subscribe.